viewers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum. In this monologue, I am going to expound verses of chapter 104 of glorious Quran. The title of this chapter is Al-Humazah, or the Slanderer. The main theme of this chapter revolves around the punishment for a slanderer, a miser and hoarder of wealth. In the light of knowledge of Quran, backbiting or slander is a grave sin, for which the sinner will be confined in the hellfire in towering columns. Besides, hoarding wealth and not spending it in the cause of God is another grave sin with equal consequences of punishment. It is important to understand why these two sins are so grave, which most of us conveniently commit, ignoring the dreadful consequences of these acts. Slander is the act of attributing something wrong to an individual to defame him, usually without any solid evidence. It is character assassination where the mean intent and may arise due to jealousy and hatred. Now the question arises, what is character? It is the sum total of all attributes possessed by an individual. It is important to remember that due to natural reasons, every human being's character is composed of good and bad features. Therefore, if slander or backbiting is made permissible, then no human being will escape its harmful consequences. The result will be chaos and animosity in every segment of family and society. Besides, the person who has been the subject of a slander will suffer irreparable loss to his character, although he may possess many other good traits. That is why slander is a serious tort even in civilized societies. An enormous amount of damages are imposed on a slanderer. Islam also condemns slander and backbiting due to reasons explained above. Besides, the true character of an individual is manifest before God, and it is He alone who has the right to punish or reward a human being in His discretion on the Judgment Day. Amassing wealth is another great sin and the chief characteristic of a miser. A person may hoard wealth to cater for his future needs and the needs of his progeny. Such a person is reluctant to spend money on others and for the cause of God. He thinks that with great wealth he can buy comforts of life for him and his progeny forever. But he forgets the fact that there is no guarantee of life, and he or his offspring may die any time. Besides, hoarding of wealth also results in slowing down of economic activity, because such persons usually hoard their wealth in the form of precious metals, land, and currencies. Such things cannot generate economic activity on their own. The result is stagnation in the economy and loss of income to large segment of the society. For example, in modern times, speculators invest billions of dollars in gold, silver, land, and currencies with the intent of multiplying their wealth at the expense of other people. If such an investment is made in productive and fair trades like manufacturing and services, majority of people will benefit from its economic fruits. Therefore, hoarding of wealth in any form is a condemnable act by Islam. In the next segment, I am going to expound specific verses of chapter 104 of Quran for information and understanding of all listeners and viewers. Verse 1 of chapter 104 reads, "Woe to all backbiting slanderers." In this verse, God condemns every backbiter for obvious reasons. Firstly, a backbiter is a person who is highlighting somebody's weaknesses or faults in his absence on the basis of his personal experience or preconceived notions. His personal experience about the weaknesses of a person may be biased or devoid of any substance. Secondly, the person whose faults are highlighted is not present at the occasion, so he cannot defend his position. It means that the reputation of a person is tarnished without providing him an opportunity to clarify his stance. This is condemned in every society, and the charge of slander is a serious tort that may attract payment of millions of dollars of damages by the slanderer to the person who is defamed. When God condemns an act so explicitly in the Quran, it means it is a grave sin, and all believers must desist from the commission of this act. By imputing slander to an individual, we are committing sin of the category of public rights, the burden of which under equity can only be relieved by the affected person and nobody else. Therefore, the very thought that on the judgment day how an oppressed person will get relief from the slanderer may shudder any sane person. One possibility may be that God may transfer the slanderer's good deeds to the defamed person's account under principles of equity. This may leave the slanderer left with only limited good deeds or no good deeds at all. Alternatively, God may transfer the sins of the defamed person to the slanderer as a means of compensation. Then hell is sure to become the destiny of the slanderer. God may protect all of us from the commission of the grave sin of slander and backbiting. Verse 2 of chapter 104 reads, "Who amass riches and sedulously hoard them." So another attribute of a sinner is mentioned in this verse, and it relates to amassing wealth in a consistent manner. Wealth can only be made when we earn more than our normal requirement and save it for future in a disproportionate manner. One analogy is that amassing wealth is also a grave sin because it makes us obsessed in the worldly affairs. A person who pursues the goal of amassing wealth has little time to think about others' well-being in a meaningful manner. Why? Because he fears that if he spends his wealth on others, it will lead to reduction of his hoarded wealth. Even when such a person spends his wealth for the cause of needy persons, it is only a fraction of what he can actually spend. In Quran, God mentions that the best way to purify your wealth and income is to distribute part of it according to your degree of faith, because there is no maximum or minimum limit mentioned in the Quran, on a poor person, a needy person, for example a wayfarer, or a legitimate debtor who cannot meet his debt obligations, etc., to please God. We must remember that God is the ultimate heir, and every bit of wealth is a trust in our hands. If we hoard it and do not spend it for the cause of God, then we betray that trust. In a crux, God guides us in the Quran that we may do personal spending from our income and wealth, albeit in a moderate manner, and must spend part of our wealth to please God. The question arises then, why hoarding of wealth is condemned in the Quran? Its answer lies in the fact that once the size of wealth crosses a certain threshold, it becomes more and more difficult for an individual to distribute a fair proportion of it for the cause of God because of greed and size of charity payable. A simple illustration will highlight this fact. Let's take the example of charity or zakat. For simplicity, we may assume that a person may spend at least 5% of his annual wealth in God's name. Otherwise, 5% is a peanut if we actually realize that we are spending to please God who has given us everything. Suppose there are 5 individuals, A, B, C, D, and E. A has amassed $0.1 million as wealth, B $1 million, C $10 million, D $100 million, and E $1 billion. Their liability to pay charity at the assumed rate of 5% is shown in this table. An analysis of this table reveals that probably A and B may be willing to pay their annual zakat or charity due to its manageable size, but it is certainly questionable whether C, D, and E are meeting their religious obligation of payment of charity. This would be highly unlikely that C may pay $0.5 million as annual charity, and D is going to pay $5 million as annual charity, and E is going to pay $50 million as charity. differently. There is a very little chance that these individuals are going to meet this obligation in a fair manner. The simple conclusion drawn from this illustration is that as we amass more wealth, the liability to pay charity also increases in direct proportion to the size of wealth. And very soon it will become impossible for us to cope with this liability because of increased size of charity and our greed towards our wealth. Think over it, critically examine how many of us actually pay charity or zakat in a reasonable proportion. The answer is none of the rich men who have amassed wealth are paying charity tax like this. So God says, woe to all such persons because they are greedy and thankless creatures. It may be a critical point for most of us who do not follow the middle path and keep on hoarding wealth due to our greed and ultimately get condemned by God. Indeed, wealth is a great test, and majority of the wealthy persons will be condemned to hellfire because they do not spend it in God's cause in the right proportion. Verse 3 of chapter 104 reads, thinking their treasures will make them live forever. In this verse, God highlights one fundamental reason for hoarding wealth, and it is the false belief that more wealth means more comfortable life forever for you and your progeny. But God warns that nobody will live forever in this world, and everybody has to die sooner or later. Actually, no one knows how long he or his children may be able to enjoy that wealth, but still he amasses it and never spends it in the right proportion in the cause of God. An eye-opener for most of us indeed. Verse 4 of this chapter reads, no, indeed, he will be thrust into the crusher. In this verse, the fate of a backbiter and hoarder of wealth is proclaimed. Such persons will be sent to the crusher in the hellfire, where they will be crushed like dust in the fire. It would be an incomprehensible punishment indeed. Verse 5 reads, what will explain to you what the crusher is? This verse simply challenges that human beings cannot comprehend the gravity of being sent to crusher in the hellfire. The crusher is elaborated in the next verses. Verse 6 reads, it is God's fire made to blaze. The crusher is God's fire that is meant to destroy everything with intense heat and flames. Even in a worldly context, the heat of fire in itself is a terrifying feeling, whether caused by an accident or a war. Then what would be the ferocity of hellfire? It is indeed beyond human comprehension. Verse 7 reads, which rises over people's hearts. The hellfire will even burn sinners' hearts, implying that the very sight of this scene will be so dreadful and terrible that every person will feel his heart is burning in it. Verse 8 reads, it closes in on them. In order to ensure that sinners may bear the maximum of punishment, the fire will be closed on them from all directions, and the sinners will find no escape from it. Verse 9 reads, in towering columns. This fire will be closed in towering columns which no human beings can climb and escape. In fact, the description of hellfire given in verses 6 to 9 is metaphorical, because God only knows the actual intensity of the hellfire. No human being can conceive it by any standard or yardstick. But it is for sure that its intensity and destruction will be beyond human imagination. Now I summarize the theme of this monologue in the following words for reinforcement purpose. 1. Backbiting and slander are two grave sins in the sight of God. 2. Amassing or hoarding wealth is also a grave sin in the sight of God. 3. The punishment for a backbiter, slanderer, and hoarder of wealth are the same in the sight of God. 4. This punishment is confinement of backbiter, the slanderer, and the hoarder of wealth into the hell fire where they will be crushed like dust repeatedly for the commission of these sins. 5. May God protect all of us from the commission of these grave sins. I conclude my monologue on chapter 104 of Quran with a prayer that God Almighty may bless this effort. Please do subscribe and share my channel for updates. It's absolutely free. Finally, do ask me questions to alleviate your concern about any related issue discussed in this monologue. Post your question in the comment section on my YouTube channel for a quick reply.